as I said before just a few moments ago, this is about standards, virtual world standards, XR standards, and about their implementation. And it asks a question, an important question, who benefits? You know, because to be honest, I think everybody believes that they know who benefits, they benefit, that there's so much demand for standards, and it comes from large enterprise, it comes from small enterprise, it comes from researchers, it comes from policymakers. The desire to see more standards in the space is definitely growing louder. For those, again, mentioning, we've talked a lot about Horizon Europe and these types of programs, and many people in the audience are participating in Horizon Europe calls and Digital Europe calls, and you see increasingly a requirement to engage with standards, with the development, with the implementation and adoption within these projects. So it's starting to take real tangible form in these projects. It's not just an aspiration, now it's an expected component and output of them. But again, I think there's still quite a lot of mystery as to really what maybe standards are. And that's not necessarily us to talk about what standards are, but definitely when we talk about who they benefit, we'll get an insight a little bit more as to what they are. So I'd like to introduce our three panelists for this session. So Matthieu, the president of the Virtual World Association, you are already familiar with him because he's already just completed his keynote this morning. We have Neil TREVETT, who is the president of the Khronos Group. Khronos Group, of course, is behind many standards initiatives, but including relevant for us, OpenXR. And then we have Pilar, who is from the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, but is also part of the New European Media Initiative as well, quite a prominent leader there working in standards. And all three bring quite a different, even though they're all very valid and valuable experts on the topic of standards, they're very dissimilar. And you're going to find out, I think, quite soon, how dissimilar they are and the different perspectives that they bring to the conversation. So I think we've done enough to kind of frame it. What I'd like to do now is maybe actually to invite each of you to do a better introduction than what I could do. And Matthieu, I know you just gave your presentation, but I'm sure there's more that you actually didn't work into that presentation that's relevant for here. So I'd like you to start off, just kind of introduce maybe the perspective that you bring to this topic.
Yeah. So actually I bring two perspectives. Definitely the core perspective is the perspective from the Virtual Worlds Association, where I just explained that we have as a mission to unite, to support research, to define what research is about, but then also to get that into commercialization and an actual impact, and bring that technology to users. And I think in that entire pipeline, if we want to coordinate that, if we want to build on each other, we cannot do without standards, right? So I think it's a prerequisite that we embrace open standards. It is also a dedicated chapter in the Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda. So in all our plans forward, the topic of standardization and adaptation of standards is very high on the agenda. My second perspective is the Siemens perspective, which is an industry perspective, which is a very pragmatic perspective on standards. And we build on standards when they make sense, right? When it brings us something commercially. And I think throughout the panel I will also come back to that point that while it is obvious, I think that we need to build on standards, there is also just pragmatic reasons why it doesn't happen today.
Yeah, and I think I think we will talk about that a lot because I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand what the business aspects, the business models behind standards, the costs associated with development, but also adoption and licensing and access. Neil, I'd like to now, invite you to introduce your perspective.
Yeah. So hi everyone. I'm Neil. So my day job's at NVIDIA. I've been in NVIDIA 20 years doing ecosystem development, which includes a lot of standards work. But I think I'm here today primarily presenting the Khronos Group, as you say, which is a standards organization. We focus on low-level hardware-oriented standards, hardware-software interface. And I've been blessed to be the Khronos president for 25 years. I've seen Khronos roll out standards that have been widely adopted in the industry, bringing 3D and immersive technologies onto a range of different platforms, firstly PCs, and then mobile, and then web, and now we're integrating immersive tech and 3D into AI. I'm a big believer in the role that immersive technologies, spatial computing, XR is going to play in the next few years. It's going to fundamentally change the way we interact with our computing resources. And I think we are headed towards a spatial evolution of the web. Call it Web 4.0 if you want. And of course, the web is a global platform whose very strength comes from being built on open standards. And I think the metaverse or the Web 4.0 is going to be exactly the same thing. It's going to be, by its very nature, a standards-based platform. And so we need a whole stack of standards. There's a long wish list of the standards we're going to need to build out, I think, the vision that many of us have. So we need standards organizations, and the standards organizations need the help of the industry to create the right standards to enable everyone to move forward. So we're at a critical time.
Well, and I think, as you mentioned, there's this stack. There's probably already a lot of standards that already exist that may be being utilized without recognition of that. But at the same time, maybe some standards that are applicable that are not being recognized and not applied to the extent that they could be. So it would be interesting to see if we can address some of those topics today too. And then now, Pilar, I'd like to invite you to bring your perspective and kind of set that out for the audience. Yeah.
Okay, my perspective is from the human. I work in human factors. So in a way, I'm complementary to you and to you. We are in an ecosystem, definitely. And on the one hand, you have the services and the products. And on the other side, you have the humans. So we need the services and the products to speak to the humans and allow the humans to interact with them. Otherwise, yes, you have a fantastic rocket that goes to Mars, but nobody's going to get into the rocket. Mm-hmm. So we need to allow for these immersive environments to the human to get inside it and be present there. The issue to me is that in this ecosystem, in Europe, we have a problem that I think is the opposite. It's an opportunity. Europe has got many, many languages. It's got many, many cultures. It's got 3 writing alphabets. In Belgium, you are bilingual. In Spain, we have 6 languages. This is an advantage or a disadvantage, because in China, there is 1. In the US, you have 2 languages, perhaps. Not that many. So for us, if we want a European virtual world ecosystem, we need to embrace the cultures, the languages, and that is challenging, and that definitely needs a standardization, because otherwise you just go for English, which is a lovely language. My mom would go for that as well. Why do we need to speak Spanish? We can speak English. Yes, Mom, but I think I would like to continue speaking Spanish. So.
Yeah, and I think that is similar to something we were talking about in the very, very morning, which is that it's kind of in Europe's DNA to discuss, to debate, and to ultimately find a commonality and to find a common ground. And so you could almost say, I mean, and I see this way, that the standards development and adoption is kind of just it's a core competency in Europe, and it's something that we can reinforce a lot in most things that we do. So I'd like now to open up with our first question. And Neil, you actually kind of already touched on this, your opinion of it. So maybe I'll come back to you kind of first and then let the others respond to that as well. Is the ecosystem at the right moment right now to adopt stronger interoperability standards for virtual worlds? Or is there something that is needed, that we need to be focusing on developing that so that then we can really start pushing forward more interoperable standards? Yeah,
I think we are at a critical point. I mean, the whole concept of virtual worlds goes back decades, but I think, to a large extent, the concept of using virtual worlds widely is always an idea that's in the future and has continued to be in the future. But I think we are getting closer to pervasive deployment, and I think the magic pixie dust has already been mentioned several times this morning is AI. AI is making possible to solve problems that a couple of years ago we didn't know how to solve. Now, how are you going to semantically understand the user's surroundings? How are you going to understand what they're saying and gesturing? Well, now we have the answer I think AI is going to enable virtual worlds, 3D, immersive, spatial computing in many different ways. Creation of content. 3D content is notoriously difficult to create. Now it's going to be democratized, both creating models and scanning the real world. AI is going to is transforming both already. It's already happening. How to understand the user, how to understand the environment, put semantic information into the hands of the experiences that are being generated and delivered to users. Again, it's being transformed already, and it will be transformed hugely over the next few years. I think AI, you said it in your keynote, Michael, the AI loves XR, and it is bidirectional. The XR and spatial computing is going to be the user interface to AI, and the virtual worlds are going to be where we teach AI to interact with the real world. I'm a big believer in spatial computing bringing us into the world, not blocking us off from the world, so I'm kind of an AR rather than a VR guy. Yep. And for that we need smart glasses. So are we at the right time? Yes, there's a lot of work to do now because of AI and spatial computing interacting, but we shouldn't kid ourselves. There's a lot of difficult engineering still to go on smart glasses, making them all-day devices, all the smarts that we would like, the great displays. So we need to be thoughtful, I think, by starting to leverage smart glasses, but not falling into the hype cycle again, thinking that smart glasses are going to solve everything right now. Instead, we need to realize it's going to be a decade-long journey as these things begin to evolve, but there's going to be opportunity steps along the way. And I think the successful companies and practitioners are going to be the ones that realize both the opportunity and the limitations as the hardware evolves over the next few years, and we can deliver value as we go along this journey together.
And maybe Pilar, excuse me. Pilar, I'd invite you to maybe also weigh in on this question. This is a question for everybody. So do you feel this is the right moment, or again, do you feel that there's some things we need to get kind of sorted and in place before we start pushing more?
Yeah, I agree completely. Is this going to be boring? I agree with you completely. I do, but my but is, yes, intelligent glasses just get any data. The problem is the data is just transformed into really poor data sets. And the data sets then cascade into really bad data AI models. So I think the AI models that we have right now are very, very crude. They're very sort of the very beginning of it. And I also think that we are not asking AI for the right information. I think we are still broken down into the very old way of thinking. For example, in my case, I come from the human. And the humans, we ask for your age and your gender. I don't care about your age and your gender, because what I care is if you live independently, so you are not a child, you are not an elderly person. So I think we have to start thinking in a very creative way and turn the world around a bit. So forget about age and gender and your education. Let's ask, can you read? Can you hear? And that perhaps would give us more precise information about the ecosystem of your living situation than your age that it gives me. So yes, I agree with you, but I think, and we must start now, yes, but we also have to start now thinking and being creative and thinking the right questions, and less is more. Why do we have to record? We're going to fry. We're going to be like dinosaurs. We're going to, if we keep on recording everything, storing everything, my God, there is not enough water in the world to cool this. So again, we must be intelligent, and less is more.
I mean, but when you talk about dinosaurs, I think of, we really like dinosaurs, and we build giant museums. We celebrate dinosaurs. It doesn't sound like such a bad analogy for those in the future. But I think we all get your point. And I think now you mentioned creative thinking to the data that we collect, like what ways we should be standardizing. And now I think that's a good segue to how, because we don't always think of large enterprise as being the most creative, drivers in that sense, but of course there are creative people who are in these enterprises and are taking some of these roles. What do you think in terms of what you've just heard now from Neil and Pilar? Is this kind of the right time for this from an enterprise perspective?
So the right time and the time, right? I think it just happened. Whether it's a choice, I think that we have. What I felt, so a very concrete example within Siemens is that we build a lot of 3D assets in virtual domains, CAD, computer-aided design, descriptions of products, of mechatronic systems. They come out in a certain file format. At Siemens, that's a JT format. Now suddenly there is NVIDIA that said, but we're going to build Omniverse based on USD. So there is standards, right? And industry pushes their own standards. And I think it's a very US-driven perspective that it's companies that set a standard and that then push for a certain standard with a commercial background behind it. So, and now we are on a journey together to see how we can ensure interoperability between these JT formats and the USD formats in a single format. So I think the industry takes a very pragmatic way towards standards. On one hand, try to push standards that they believe they can make money with, if they are the ones that push something. And the other is what I explained as the first objective for virtual worlds being getting rid of silos and ensuring that data can travel from a supplier to a designer to a manufacturer to an end user. That's, I think, where we look for what is then available in terms of standards such that we can actually communicate with these other partners. So for me, it's not a question of whether the time is now. The time is definitely now. I also believe that besides the amounts of data, we have enough standards. I don't think we need to get back to the table and design a new standard. But it's about deployment and ensuring that we not only at large enterprise level, but also support small and medium enterprises to get access to the standards that make sense. I think that is for me where the key challenge is, what will drive us looking backwards, whether this was the time where we adopted standardization.
Yeah. So you've definitely touched on it when you were presenting earlier about the SRIA and the Virtual World Association. Can you talk a little bit more about how open standards fits into this really multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral stakeholder group as well?
Yeah, so there is a dedicated chapter on standardization and interoperability. This builds on the EIT works. Initiative over the past 2 years called VIVISO that has delivered an inventory of standards relevant for virtual worlds. And there is an view of the standards. And it's not 100 standards that they found or 500 standards that they found or 1,000, but it's 1,300 relevant standards that they have identified that contribute to the realization of virtual worlds. And in the SRIA and in the Virtual Worlds Association, we have a clear ambition to build on that work of that research project and ensure that we start to understand how that then works. And what is released last week is a report by this community, and I should give the credits to Christophe Roende and Christine Perret for doing that work. There is a huge document describing this entire landscape, but now they have digested that to 10 recommendations towards the European Commission for the adoption of standards and how to get that done. And I think a key part of the recommendations that they give is they start getting their hands dirty using them. And there I think we have a clear role to play as Virtual Worlds Association. We can help designing calls that ask for the implementation of certain standards, ensure that people really get that machine going and that it's no longer one of the 1,300 line items in the database.
I'd like to now take a look at historically, and Neil, I'll point to you here, because this is not the first set of technologies or application areas that have wanted to standardize, and certainly standard efforts have been done in other sectors for a long time, and the Khronos Group has developed a lot of those. Can you kind of talk about historically what parallels maybe do you recognize from earlier efforts that you think were going to work for us here in virtual worlds and XR, and maybe what were some of the pitfalls that are real ones that we need to be cautious about in terms of how they're adopted ultimately?
Yeah, so Khronos has developed many standards over the years, and some of them have been widely adopted, some of them have not. So we have made mistakes, and so we have lessons. I think to Matthieu's point, I think, yes, I think a lot of the industry consortia, I'm not sure it's a US thing, it's more of an industry consortia thing. They take an approach where they work from existing technologies that have often been developed in a proprietary domain. And often you get asked, oh, don't you hate proprietary technologies? Aren't they the enemy of open standards? And actually, no. Open standards, I think successful open standards that use this iterative bottom-up approach actually need companies out there innovating in the space. They are the ones taking the arrows in the back, the innovators by the side of the road. We need them to do the Darwinian experimentation, to try stuff out there in the market, finding out what works, what doesn't work. And that's the first golden rule of standardization that we find is don't start standardizing until that there is a proven industry need, which means someone is trying to do it in the proprietary sense. There's a really positive kind of spiral between proprietary work and open standards work. When a technology becomes well understood in the proprietary space, and everyone is kind of doing the same thing, but in a different way, there's no innovation advantage anymore to just shipping in a different way. That becomes a pain point. That is the time to standardize, and that's the art of a good standard is getting the timing right. And it's sometimes when you're in the middle of it, it's difficult to figure out when the time is right. But if you're lucky and you get the right time, start the standardization. If you find yourself doing R&D by standardization committee, that's death by 1,000 cuts. Don't do that. We've tried that. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how long does it take for you? How long does it take a standard to go to? How long it takes you to build a standard, to pass a standard?
So it's a good question. It does depend, obviously, but I would say on average, if someone has a kind of well-proven proprietary technology and makes a good decision to contribute it, but then of course it goes through a consensus building process and gets polished and becomes cross-vendor, I would say 18 to 24 months.
That's fast.
If you have a good process.
But that's fast and that's crazy because technology in 24 months, by the time you standardize it,
it can be out of date. So you need to move fast. Yes, absolutely. You become outdated, and you need to have an open governance process so everyone has a say. So you get genuine consensus being built. Because if you don't take the time to build genuine consensus, it'll ship, and then no one's interested. It's not, and a real standard is not just a specification. You need conformance tests. Because anything that, if you're going to have, the whole point of a standard is you can have multiple implementations of it in different price points, markets, vendors, and that's a good, healthy competition dynamic. But if you're going to have multiple implementations with reliability, you need to have conformance tests because anything that's not tested will not work. And then you need tooling, because if there's no tooling around a standard, it won't get used because no one can figure out how to do it. And that very often that tooling is in open source. And then once you actually have an open standard, if you're lucky enough to have the timing right and the technology was right and you found the right market need, it's a precious thing. Then it's up to the standards organization to maintain it and iterate it. You need to constantly be scanning for the evolving use cases, which will change very fast, and build those new use cases and requirements into updates of the specification. It's an ongoing, never-ending, but wonderful task. And it's both a responsibility and, you're given the responsibility by the industry to keep this thing moving forward.
Can I ask, how, you said it starts from a proprietary technology typically, but then who picks it up and who develops the tests and who develops the infrastructure, the documentation for such a standard?
So most like consortia, they have an IP framework, which is important. So there's two parts of making sure that doesn't go wrong, because it could go wrong. I mean, you can imagine if someone has a proprietary technology and they're trying to make it into a de facto, but they still keep control for some whatever reason. To prevent that happening, you have two things. One is an intellectual property framework. So if they make a contribution, they're not going to assert their patents against anyone who implements the specification, and that has happened in the past. You have to be really careful. And secondly, you need a genuinely open governance model, where even the companies that are maybe contributing the technology, they get no special say. They're just one voice amongst many and with equal say as the development of the standard goes forward. If you can have those two things, then it becomes safer to take a proprietary contribution as a basis for standardization.
I mean, that was apparently a very rich question, because we've had quite a lot shared about this. And as I'm listening to it, I'm coming back to that first question about the right time. Because I think, Neil, you kind of described actually a time, which is when the motivation from proprietary developers, they see this as a pain point for them. And sometimes I do wonder in our space, particularly with the wearable hardware, so more in this particular space, you have this consumer side, but you also have this industrial application, and so this device isn't always made for the use case, and the pain is in a place where the maker of that hardware isn't really prioritizing this space. And I kind of feel like in some cases that's really been, at least the VR, but I think probably it will be increasingly the smart glasses and wearables. And so again, thinking of when is that right time for that hardware, or the proprietary IP owner, to recognize that this is painful enough for me. I may recognize that it's painful for others, but is it painful enough for me to then really kind of open up in that sense? And I think, yeah, that way, are we there? We might actually very well be. I think that could be the time now.
Because if companies have proprietary technology and it becomes kind of widely understood and there are multiple implementations, it's very easy for the company with proprietary technology to be bypassed.
Yeah.
It's happened many times. Because if you can't keep innovating fast enough to keep ahead, and companies that do that, good for them, because they're doing the thing. They're innovating, they're adding value on the innovation path, but it's difficult to compete against the whole industry. Once the whole industry gets on a path, that they are going to do their thing. And if you don't make your proprietary technology at that point an open standard, so your technology becomes the open standard, that's good. That's a good thing for everybody and for you. You will be bypassed as the industry figures out how to do things and not be reliant on you. So, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because I think in the example of like the internet, I don't know if there, if it develops in a different manner than that example. So there are still different ways that this all can originate. Pilar, I'd like to bring the human back into this conversation, because I think we've talked about companies, IP owners, developers, industry stakeholders. When do you think it would make sense, or when do you see the human factors being involved in this work? Hearing is when there's demand, so it means that there's people using it. So, but it may be a bit late at that point, maybe to bring that in. What do you think?
I think it is the opposite of you in the way we do the standards for humans, because you need to have a lot of money to push a standard, and it is to do with a human need. So it is to do with how deaf people can enter the virtual worlds, or how can Europeans can watch the content in different languages, or it comes from the blind people, or now something that we do a lot is the plain language. How do we communicate each other to understand each other? Because believe it or not, communication is the worst of all possible. So for us, it is hard because it takes forever to do a standard. It takes from 3 to 5 years. even though humans, we're all the same. So it's not technology, it's just us. But we won't agree on anything, it is remarkable. But anyway, we must have standards, and they have to be open source, and they have to be open standards for humans, which they aren't at the moment. We need to have them from the very beginning. An example, it's, for example, the subtitles, captions, you call them. Subtitles in immersive environments are completely different from 2D subtitles. They clash in the space. You don't know if someone is speaking behind you, you don't know where to find the subtitle, where you place them. Sign language, where do you put the sign language, or things like that. We have got the data, we have got the results, nobody's going to use them. And that is what really annoys me. Europe has paid for titles in 360, and everybody's ignoring this. And it's there, and they should be included from the beginning.
And maybe because that was developed, I mean, in parallel, right? That type of work was parallel, and then and then trying to bring that in to standards.
I think when you think of when you design anything, you have to think who's going to use this that you're producing, and then you have to start thinking about the human right from the beginning of the architecture. Otherwise, it will be an orthopedic at the end, super expensive, and it would be always a wooden leg. It wouldn't be inside from the beginning. So I think accessibility is horizontal, is not silos, it is horizontal. And every time we design something, and it's for a human, we have to think, how is the human? The gloves that you mentioned before in your super interesting talk. Yes, with the gloves, you can go into a museum, but how do you activate? How do you activate the gloves, you know? Yeah. And if I am blind, gloves are made for blind people. How do I tell the blind person that you have to come on? So yes, technology is super fantastic, super standardized, super everything, but we always forget the human there.
But do you think it stands in the way of adoption?
Yes.
But then, can you explain why would the commercial company, the startup that invents this glove, not pay much more attention to?
It's a mystery to me, because, for example, you have the European Accessibility Act that makes that all televisions, all broadcast, private and public, must have their content accessible. That is, with audio description, with subtitles and sign language. But there is, in the user interface, there is no way to activate the service. So you would find a broadcaster spending a fortune making the content accessible, and the user never being able to know that the content is accessible and to bring the content up. Yeah. It's a bit of not just silo, it's just a gap.
Yeah.
Gap.
Yeah, but it also sounds to me like an invitation for everybody who tomorrow tries out things and experiences what you just said, to not be enthusiastic to the maker and say, what a beautiful thing you've built, but to actually be honest and say, yeah, but it doesn't work for me, right?
But do you know something amazing? 9% of men are colorblind. Mm-hmm. And think of sports that they have the background in green. Football, rugby, snooker, the background is green. And any color, red, or that you put on top of green, is still the same. We are still having football played with a green background, and you and me together, they will never know if you are in one team or I am in another team, because for a colorblind person, we have the same color T-shirt.
For me too.
Or the three of us. So it is this very simple thing that you have to take into consideration. It is sometimes it's super simple. If you put subtitles too fast, nobody can read them.
What only triggers, what still, for me, the main question is, why are the engineers too much engineers that they don't realize that they need to build it for someone else and just for themselves? Is that the core of the issue, or why is there no adoption of these standards, right? Coming from industry and in the Siemens context, we talk with the people that are like us, right? We talk to the product designers, to the manufacturing people. We understand the language of these people, so we can typically design products for ourselves. But obviously, if you are in a consumer product domain, this is a huge issue, and I've studied industrial design engineering. I've been taught that we start from the end user. So I'm surprised that this is so difficult to...
I am also surprised,
Okay.
but here we are.
Yeah. Yeah, but then I think, but then I still believe that a core item is that the consumers should pick up, right? That we as users, maybe it stands in the way of XR adoption still, that we all say, yeah, looks beautiful, where in fact we say, yeah, but I don't like this thing on my head. That we should think about giving honest feedback on the experiences that we get delivered.
Yes, but you should have the right to put the bloody thing on and think it's awful. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
Doesn't.
Yeah.
So that's whatever. That should not impede you to do what you want to do, and then decide, I want to do this, or I want, or try it. You'll never know if you like it or you don't like it. So
This question, I mean, there's a lot of ways to kind of look at this issue of adoption. And first comes to my mind is, were these broadcasters or these distributors of content, were they not involved in the standards process in some way? And how would they be? What are some ways to involve this variety of stakeholders? Because I think for many, as I mentioned before, there's this desire, this motivation to contribute. But I can admit that for many of the universities and EU project leading participating institutions that I know, many of them really don't know tangibly the steps, because it's not a part of their day job. So I think, I mean, the next question is, how can we really ensure that there's this diverse, broad engagement in a process that seems like it can, I mean, even though, Neil, you were saying quite it was inspiring that it can be so fast, but the perception is that it is not that fast. And what can we do to kind of ensure, but not just in like, here we made this, you need to go do this, and it's up to you to then go figure out to what extent you authentically embed this and embody this. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the main barrier to organizations getting involved in standardization is that kind of perception that standards are slow, boring, and lowest common denominator. It's kind of trailing edge, where it's actually the reverse. You know, the good standards actually push the industry forward. I think the main barrier to low participation from the industry is simply us, the standards community, not doing good enough job in actually communicating that our doors are open for business. Yeah. And that participation actually is easier and more interesting than you think. Honestly, no, it's not boring, really. Our standards aren't boring, they're good. So, I mean, but logistically, I think the doors really are open. I mean, I'll use Khronos as an example. This is true for many consortia out there. They're open to anyone, globally. The costs are relatively low. I mean, we do need to charge something because that's what enables us to, we're all non-profits, so all the money we gather through membership dues and other things goes straight back into the standards. But we need some money to do the work. But no, at Khronos, if you're a small company, it's $4,000 a year. It's not a lot of money. No. And we try to be inclusive. For example, we run all of our teleconferencing calls at a time that's actually quite friendly to Europe. I live in California. That means I'm getting up at 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning. Just make it friendly for Europe. But that's great because we do get global participation. And we find it remarkably difficult to actually get input from the industry, from the wider industry. Mm-hmm. These standards don't make themselves. We need the industry to tell us what it is they actually want. That's the way that good standards are created. So, please, if you remember nothing else out of this panel, please, find the standards organization that's creating the standards that you care about, and actually, get involved if you possibly can. So you make a real difference, particularly if you're an end user, because it's the end user that counts in the end. And if the end user, I'll tell you, if you have a Khronos meeting and we actually have a developer or end user comes in and tells us what they want, the room goes quiet. because everyone is listening, because that's the real data that we need. So encourage everyone here to get involved.
Yeah, great.
One thing that I still wonder is that when I just came out of university, I started working for Toyota, and I was involved in a standardization initiative for child safety, for putting your child seat on the front seat and disconnect the airbag from deployment. And it was an originally German ecosystem that worked on that standard, and we as Toyota joined that discussion. And I did the best that I could to represent my company. But in the end, when the standard was there, Toyota did not even adopt it. They just wanted to learn about that standard. And I think in Khronos Group you have a huge amount of companies listed, but do you also have the experience that even if companies build the standard jointly, that's still not a guarantee for adoption?
No, there is never a guarantee of adoption, but that's why it's important when you start out, that checklist.
Yeah.
Are we really solving a problem? Are there actually proprietary solutions out there, which is a good indicator? No, are people working on it? And it's a good indicator whether it is going to get adopted. We like to say that if you're working on open standard and there's no proprietary competitor, that's when you worry. Because it means no one's interested in what you're doing. You want to have a proprietary competitor, especially when you start. And actually, when you keep going too, there's often a proprietary competitor to a successful standard. And that's actually a natural and healthy dynamic. It means that there's a real need. And if that proprietary technology is continuing to be invested in, but the rest of the industry wants an open standard, that's all good. That's fine. That's the way it should be, actually, many times. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to say that for us, Europeans, to do standards is very expensive. You come from the land of milk and honey. Europe, we are very... So for us, at least for me, in Spain, in Barcelona, in Catalonia, it is very expensive. It's expensive in terms of time, expensive in terms that I have to get up at 3 in the morning when I do the Japan or when I do the US, so that as well. The traveling and the amount of hours that you spend there. How do I pay for this? The thing that to me is the worst thing is when you start doing the standard is a marathon. You have to understand who are you sitting with, why. This is not, you just don't can join, but it is a marathon. And the first 20 kilometers, you don't know what you're doing and you don't know where you are. Yeah?
I agree. It's the investment in time. It is really.
It is.
Yes.
And you grow and you understand and you do the contributions and you learn how to write the contributions and how to make the... How do I do that from Europe? Because in fact, almost 50% of my research time is in standards. I pay for this from European projects. Mm-hmm. So there is, when we have funding in Europe, there is a moment when we have to disseminate, communicate, and we have to think of resilience, whatever you have done, how it will stay in time. And the standard is something that will stay in time. So always, whenever I participate in a European project for research, I am in charge of making sure that whatever we are developing, I feed it in contributions to the agencies. Very good. Go for the agencies that you care, definitely.
I mean, obviously it's great if EU funding can be a great catalyst, but if we're not getting government funding, the way I normally try to counsel people whether to get involved in standards or not, it's not, as we were saying backstage, standards are not a means to themselves. Standards are a way to solve an industry problem. And so companies or individuals, in my opinion, should get involved in a standard. Yes, it may take nights, but if the benefit you're going to get downstream, and hopefully not that far downstream, is way more than the investment that you put in. In other words, your return on investment, if you put in 100 hours to help create a standard, you're going to avoid fragmentation that may save you thousands and thousands of hours downstream, or create market opportunities that you wouldn't have had that may be worth significant value to you. So I think you have to put the investment you're making into standards into that larger context. And with the goal in mind and the benefit you're going to get downstream. Then it kind of makes sense. Of course, there's a cash flow issue maybe, but
Yes,
yeah.
but definitely, I agree with you completely. What you get from making the standards is far more than, yeah, definitely. And it's worth doing it. And it's a shame that we don't get enough people wanting to sit to do standards. I don't know why.
Well, I mean, I think now we're coming, circling around the question as to who benefits. And I think you highlighted people with problems maybe benefit because they're the ones who have the greatest motivation to justify the investment in time and effort and cost. So I guess that for me that brings back to this final question, and then we'll kind of wrap up with final thoughts, but a final question around what's the governance structure of standards? You know, it's open, everyone gets to come in. There definitely is a perception that there are, if you're a really large player, one, you can participate much more, you have those resources, but then perhaps the standard is actually driven by either big tech or large enterprise, but we want SMEs involved. We want these people who are maybe really closer to the end user or the end user themselves in these roles, but there's definitely a perception that it's not only is it very difficult and expensive to participate, as a consequence, maybe standards development is actually favoring a particular profile of entity. How would you guys, I mean, do you think that's true, number one, and do you think that if it's so, it's appropriate that these larger enterprise who have these resources or projects who get funding specifically to work in this space, that it's fine, it's appropriate that they have this type of maybe predominant role. But how do you guys respond or think about this issue of the perception as to who really is leading it and who really then benefits from it?
Yeah. Isn't the only one that does not benefit from standards the one that tries to push a proprietary standard? Because that's, I think, the only one that really competes against the open standard, right? I think all the other end users, developers, makers, producers benefit from open standards, except for the one that has his proprietary standard and that tries to fight this. But
yeah, no, I agree. I think a genuine open standard and a good governance that's meeting an industry need benefits everyone who is using that standard. I mean, the people that are using it have reduced costs, reduced time to market because they're leveraging work that other people have done. They get access to a broader market opportunity because if they're creating content, it'll ship on a lot more hardware. It's an obvious advantage. And a good standard, it's not a lowest common denominator. It's a good vehicle for innovation that keeps the industry moving forward to everyone's benefit. But you're right. It's like we were saying before. It's the companies that have a proprietary technology and they don't innovate and they get bypassed. Or it's the companies that try to do everything themselves and don't succeed. Now, there are only a few companies that large that can do that, and some of them do it very successfully. And again, that's a good thing. But if you try to do that, try to complete the complete vertical stack for a product yourself without leveraging the work of others, and you fail, then you wish you would have used open standards because you don't have to do everything yourself.
Yeah.
While something interesting in Europe, some standards, definitely the human factor standards, the European Commission, the European Parliament, because once you have a European law approved, the European law will trigger a mandate, and the mandate tells that a standard should be created so countries can say that they fulfill the law, what the law says. And we have a terrible, or fantastic, for me it's fantastic, for industry it's terrible. In Europe we have terrible 3 laws, that is it's called the Bermuda's Triangle. The first one is GDPR, that apparently all industries in the universe suffer terribly because of the GDPR. Well, I'm sorry. Then the other one is the European Accessibility Act. That means that all content, all media content, and any service or product to access this content must be accessible. That really annoys everyone as well, but yay, otherwise we are not going to have access to this content or the services. And the third one is the AI Act that everybody hates. But again, it's the beginning, but it's not bad. Canada approved one last week as well. So I think these laws are pushing down as standards, that they have to be fulfilled yes or no by industry. I don't know if we'll be more competitive in Europe or not, but this is what we have, and I think it's wonderful to be a European.
I'd like now to invite all of you, after we've had this series of discussions and conversations, to, I guess, leave the audience with something. What's a final statement, a final perspective that they should take with them? And maybe, I don't know, who wants to go first? Pilar?
I can go first.
Yeah.
And I hope XR, or I hope virtual worlds, don't follow the human-centric. Human-centric is when you gather data from humans and you blah, blah, blah. No, human first, not human-centric, okay? It's a massive difference. So we have to think very hard how we're going to do that. But unless we forget human-centric and go human first, I think we are in the wrong track. So human first.
All right, yeah. Neil?
I think Europe can play a leadership role in global standards. I think that the doors are open, there's no barriers. You're doing it in many places. Please don't silo Europe into European standards. You don't need to do that. You can lead global standards through the technology and the skills that are here in Europe. And I think there actually is a role for Europe in the regulation space too. That the rest of the world, I think, is looking to Europe, particularly with immersive devices are going to be collecting such an incredible amount of very personal data. The stakes are going to get much higher. AI, it could go horribly wrong. I think Europe is the natural leader, as has already been said. So, please engage in the global standards community, and then perhaps invest in the rollout. If Europe is looking for local benefit from local investment, which is perfectly reasonable, invest in how you roll out those standards, but don't bifurcate the world at actually creating the standards. Would be my request.
All right, Matthieu.
And I think it drills down. I wrote it down because this week this ETSI report has been published, the Augmented Reality Framework Report, it is called. And the recommendations can be summarized in 5 topics. One is reduce fragmentation. So not more standards, but ensure that we benefit from the standards that are there. Work on engagement of buyers, SMEs, and academia. So it's not about industry that needs to adopt. We need to put the human first. I tend also to say human-centered rather than human-centric. We need to work on communication, awareness, and education. So I think there is a big job to do there, where also the Virtual Worlds Association has a role to play. Access to information. And lastly is validation and implementation. And I think what you said is we need to get our hands dirty, right? We need to deploy, learn which standard work, also improve standards if they don't tick all the boxes. The time was now, right? I think.
Yeah, coming back to that first question.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everyone, I'd like to, on behalf of the audience, on behalf of United XR, would like to thank all 3 of you for sharing your time and your perspectives. And yeah, Matthieu, Neil, Pilar, thank you again. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.